Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Open Source Tribe Building, where we explore ways we can build deeper, more meaningful connections and communities using the online resources available to us. My first guest is Moritz Bierling, a good friend of mine and a researcher and strategist for Exosphere, the education platform based out of South America. And I'd like to welcome you to the show, Moritz.
Hi, good to be here.
Great. So the first question I wanted to pose to you is, what do you think of when you hear the word or the phrase open source tribe building, and what does that mean to you?
Well, it sounds like a digitalization of something that has been going on for ages. The open source rings a bell in terms of software development, so kind of the free software movement, and their ethos of like information wants to be free and everybody should have access to it as far as possible. And tribe building, that I like that because it seems more focused on action, which I'm trying to get into more and more, and recently have been getting more and more allergic to information that's just out there that you consume for consuming it. So I'm excited to hear that you're putting those two together.
Excellent. That's exactly what I'm going for. So it's really, it's great that was communicated. And so knowing a little bit about your personal life and how you left your studies and went to Exosphere, I was wondering more in general terms, if you could speak to how you've been able to use the internet and the information available to you online to affect your personal offline life, and that could be from relationships, your working life, etc.
Right. Yeah, for me, it's become a huge part of how I navigate the world, both in terms of relationships and information, or even work. So when I started really using social media for that purpose, it was mostly Facebook, later on also Twitter. And I use those networks in a way that I feel most people don't. So when I look at how people like my brothers or other people that I know use these platforms, they basically either follow like big pages that have funny videos or cat memes, or to connect with the friends they already have. Whereas I try to use them in a way that I constantly get in touch or have contact with people who I don't know yet, with information streams that are high quality. So these may be about science, about philosophy, about politics, about entrepreneurship, all kinds of these topics that you can find information online in Wikipedia, like all of that is always out there. But what these streams on social media allow me to do is basically draw from many different communities that already exist, kind of the best things together, and then make use of them, or even like kind of funnel this information to other communities that I think would like this. And so I've kind of built this negentropic engine, and I'll get into what that means in a second. This negentropic engine of accumulating interestingness and spreading it to other people, which then allows me to attract opportunities as well. So because I've become a sort of recognized source for useful and interesting information, people also come to me when they hear, hey, there's something new that's going on, you should check that out, or hey, I'm working on this, can you help me with that? And so by sharing information liberally and making it accessible and communicating it also in my own words, I've attracted quite a number of people who are following me for that and who also bring me interesting new things. And so negentropic means counter entropic. So entropy is the force in the universe that kind of breaks everything down. It's kind of the general trajectory of the universe, at least as far as physicists are concerned. And negentropy is kind of the phenomenon where in local environments you actually generate order instead of chaos.
Excellent. That's a fantastic answer to that question. I wondered if could you speak a little bit to the role you're playing in not only connecting people, but also in maybe translating some of the information, because there's an element of connectivity where you're a node in a system, which is still basically just allowing two people to consume the other's information and connecting them to that.
Right.
But I think there's an element of production which you're involved in the middle, which is almost translating and curating or connecting what the value is. And that's a lot of what I'm interested in exploring in this podcast, of how we can increase our individual agency as sort of agents in the online world, and help us to correct this balance, this unbalance between consumption and production. And so if you could maybe speak to a little bit of just how, in your role of translating between these different communities, you've been able to actually increase your ability to produce and perform your own deep work in the knowledge economy, making you more valuable as an individual.
Right. Well, this kind of way of navigating the online world hasn't come from nowhere. It's like it hasn't spontaneously happened. I had to build a number of habits and kind of assemble a set of tools in order to be able to do that in a feasible way. So one thing is that I have a personal knowledge management database. I use Evernote, one of those note-taking tools, where I basically collect all of the pieces of content that I find online in my day-to-day surfing of the web or working anyways. And then I have them in a central location. So even when I'm offline, I can look up things that I've seen or listened to or thought about in the past at the tip of a keystroke. And that way I have this kind of constantly self-enriching resource of already good material. I don't have to curate. I don't have to research do a new research on the web when I want to learn something about a certain subject, unless it's something I've never thought about or never read about. But I can go to my own database and kind of see, oh, I already had some thoughts on this, or hey, here's some bolded passages that I've looked at before. And so I've kind of constructed this way of cooperating with my past and future selves, by kind of doing that work once, and then later on it becomes discoverable by future versions of myself, who then can assemble that into new contexts. And that's a huge part of how I produce in this digital realm, where I have lots of content from other people and from myself. And then maybe I can make it concrete with an example. Last week I was in Krakow, and I gave a speech there at a meetup about agent-centric architecture. So kind of this holochain new paradigm of how we can do peer-to-peer applications. And I had about 2 weeks to prepare that. And I didn't prepare anything until about 3 hours before the talk was scheduled. And then I assembled it rapidly in the span of those 3 hours. And I had 20 minutes into the meetup where other people were already speaking. I still completed it, and then I was done. And I just went to the stage and gave that talk. And so to me, this kind of personal knowledge management thing has given me the ability to very quickly draw together quite complex presentations or content in a matter of hours. And so I have no fear of missing out, no kind of deadline fear anymore, because I know I can quickly solve a problem when it presents itself. So I less over-optimize. I feel like that's something we often have to unlearn when we come from normal education contexts, where we front load a huge part of the education that we're going through. We're learning, but we're not actually making use of that information in a context other than a test. And so for me, I have this ongoing learning process that I document. And then when I have a specific problem I need to solve, I can make use of what I've already done very quickly. So that's the one part. But my role in kind of shuffling this information between different digital places is that I use this database and this information, and I translate it in the sense that I do short videos, or I share thoughts I have while I interact with the information on social media. So recently I read a book called The Knowledge Illusion as part of an anti-book club, where about 60 people were reading books around that kind of subject. And then everybody submits their summary to a central location. And so everybody has access to like huge amounts of information that's very discoverable. And doing that, I shared in a tweet storm kind of the top 15 learnings that I learned from that book. And so I engage other people during my own learning process with the material itself, which is very attractive to people because it really makes them feel like they are learning something, which they are, but also that they can have kind of a conversation. They really like the engagement about subjects rather than just learning it by themselves. So that's really what I do a lot.
Excellent. Yes, that was a brilliant tweet storm. I read that last night. So I'll share that in the show notes. And so my next question was going to be, what are some of the most exciting developments in the world of software that are happening at the moment, which you can see helping people form resilient communities and more meaningful connections in the real world?
Well, there are several. I mean, one thing that I found recently was an interesting discussion platform that basically makes it possible to have very good arguments on social media, which usually it doesn't happen. People have a hard time having high-level conversation without it deteriorating into Hitler. And so that was an interesting thing. That's a cool platform. I don't remember the name right now. There are other things in the cryptocurrency realm. There are community social networks like Mastodon and other ones. But the thing that really strikes my interest and that I've personally put a lot of effort behind in communicating about is Holochain and Holo, which is a sort of peer-to-peer crypto application technology that allows us to build applications in any which way. It doesn't even have to be a financial application like so many cryptocurrencies have today or are today, and build them in a way that really fits our specific community. So you could imagine a kind of Slack clone on Holochain that you've adapted to your specific needs as a community, and where the network and the information that is distributed across that network really only happens between you and the other people in that social context. So instead of having a Facebook group, for example, or a WhatsApp group, where your messages go onto a central server and are served out to you on your specific device, this network shuffles that information directly between your devices in that particular social context, and thus kind of allows you to escape the fangs of FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So it's something I'm really excited about, and we're going to be seeing much more of that in the very near future, particularly because they've worked on building an organization and app called Holo, which allows this kind of technology to be accessed by anybody with a web browser, basically, by just typing in a web address, a URL, and then using it, and without having to download any specific software. So that's going to be really exciting, and also helping us prepare for what I think is impending in the next 18 months, which is the next financial crash. And so we're going to be needing these kind of technologies to offload lots of the social coordination that happens on company level onto kind of this open source tribe level, where we actually have people we trust already, where there's existing cultural capital, and not squandering that, but actually making use of it, strengthening it, and using it to kind of provide a net that can stem that load when it gets offloaded in such a crisis situation.
Yeah, excellent. That actually leads very well into my next question, which was the idea of value and how we can generate cultural capital, and how capital itself is not only a monetary thing, but it's something that we can invest in beyond, beyond money, and that can take that can take form in many different ways. Um, so maybe you could speak a bit to that idea of value and creating relationships or investing in things which provide security, which is what we seek from capital, lower transaction costs, these kind of ideas, which many people aren't familiar with, because we've sort of had tunnel vision that capital is something related to money, and that actually
Right.
value and the currencies that we use to interact with lots of people, whether that's trust, whether that's reputation, all of these sort of things.
Right. Yeah, I think value is a subject that where you can talk without end. I mean, it's probably even one of the biggest parts of philosophy, like what is valuable, the is ought divide, all of these things kind of go into that direction. But for me, the kind of area where I've recently found the subject most, and where I engage with it, is again this kind of peer-to-peer technology stuff. And these holochain people, they've come to the point where they are today with this particular technology, not by like playing around with technology, but by playing around with philosophy, with ideas, like with what value means, what different forms it can have. And so they've kind of gone down conceptually to the bottoms of philosophy, and having found some interesting answers there, then have come up and built kind of the other structures, both technologically and kind of informationally on top. And so what they talk about is this idea of currencies, but not how we usually use it as to mean money, but rather current C's, so current minus C's. The idea that a currency is something that makes visible shapes and enables flows of value, of resources, of information. So, and we use currencies like that every single day. We just don't realize or recognize them as such. So if you buy food and it has a GMO-free label or a free-range label or something like that, you could think of that also as a currency, although it's not a money currency. It's not even it's not even really a rating system, but it's a kind of binary reputation currency. Either you have it or you don't, and if you have it, that means something about the context in which this product has been created. And so it allows you to make more sophisticated purchasing decisions that rely on factors other than price. And so you find these everywhere. Like basically every single product has something else other than price as a purchasing argument. When you buy a jacket, when you buy a computer, there are ratings, there are certificates, there are user reviews, there are all these kind of currencies that you pay attention to in order to navigate the complexity of your life. And so money really is just a small subset of currency, albeit one that we use every day and that is most familiar, but it's not sufficient. And so bringing this kind of understanding into the digital realm and making the creation and proliferation of new types of currencies as easy as possible is something that they are working on, and where I am getting really excited about what that means, because it really means that we can basically take the values we have as a community or as an individual, put them into a specific arrangement or a specific structure of a currency or multiple currencies, like an interrelated currency system, and then encourage and shape the flows and habits of the community that we are building this for. So people can pay attention to the things we really care about, rather than the normal systems of symbols that we are forced to pay attention to, because that's the only way we know how to navigate so far. So just to make the point clear one more time, a college degree, for example, is also a currency. It's something where it basically it shapes the flow of education for the students inside that institution, and it's a reputation currency that you can use to get a job. It's made up of a performance currency and a time currency. So credits are a time currency, meaning you've spent a certain amount of hours in a specific subject or class, and then the grades you have in that class are a performance metric for how well you learned the material, hopefully. That, of course, it's never perfect. So you see how a massively complex organization like a university makes use of these kinds of systems to allow the students to pay attention to what really matters and how they should make decisions in going about getting their degrees.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting parts about the age that we're moving into is how in this sort of distributed or decentralized forms of society or communities which are springing up, is that there's this massive increase in the diversity of signals. And so a college degree is a form of currency in so much as not having a college degree is also in a sense a currency in certain circles, because that signals so much about you. If you say, oh, I chose not to go to college. And so there's this whole range of information that can signal to your peers, and it's a way of navigating, perhaps trying to find your tribe, I think.
Exactly. And exactly. I make use of that every day. Like, I don't have a college degree. I dropped out of 2 study programs. And today my signal to the outside world about what I'm good for and what I've done so far is my portfolio. It's what I've done in my work, in my interests that I have on my website. Basically, my website is kind of the signal I can send to people when I want them to work with me. And when you understand this kind of subject in this way, you can get creative about it. And this is what I find so exciting. Like, you can get creative about how you want to send a signal, what that signal should be. For example, when I apply for a job or want to work with a company, I don't necessarily send a resume, because mostly they land in the bin anyways. I send a personal pitch deck where I basically show them, hey, I can do these kind of things. I've done these things in the past. And if I really want that job, I might even start working for them before they even have hired me, to kind of show them I can create value for you. Why don't you give me a chance to create even more value for you and give me a small portion of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think as well, there's an idea that just sprung to mind of, on people are very environmentally conscious at the moment. And there's an interesting component to the digital age, is that it's essentially like resource neutral to some extent. Creating software, you can create incredibly complex systems which don't have much of an environmental impact, and then,
or at least it feels that way.
Yeah. I mean, depending, obviously there's the hardware side to it, but it's not like building fleets of boats to go and conquer the new world or something. We can do an incredible amount of things very cheaply, let's say. And the idea that just sprung to mind was this thought that a lot of signaling in the past has come through kind of material wealth. And so we have a hierarchy of I don't know, kings or queens or celebrities, or, and you can signal your wealth or your status or your belonging to those tribes through these kind of physical, whether it's a flashy watch or a type of jacket or all of these things. And so I think it will be interesting as we go further into this world of alternative currencies and the ability to signal the types of message you want so you can be picked up by your tribesmen, which is, I think, probably the main part. It is not necessarily to have the flashy watch. It's to make sure that you're not wasting your time with small talk when you could be having the types of discussions you'd like to be, for instance. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that starts to manifest and what kind of, maybe there will be sort of physical material representations of some of those signals. Maybe we'll go back to feathers on the
Right.
head.
And I think right. I think there are different forms of wealth as well. Like we usually break them down to money, of course, because again, it's the most prevalent form of wealth that people recognize. But to me, I feel wealthy in more than that way. Like I have a lot of time that I can spend how I like it. I have the freedom to travel. I have quite a few relationships that I can count on to basically, get a new job when I need one, or get recommendations about where to do. So I think expanding the understanding and recognition of different forms of wealth allows us to also diversify that kind of social sphere, social organism, ecology, and allow more people to do more with less.
Very well put. Right, Moritz, thank you so much. I'd like to finish up this podcast with a final question, which is, what advice would you give to people who are looking to kind of maximize their offline return from their online engagement? What are the skills? What are the places? What are the kind of habits that people can cultivate so that they start to bring a better balance to their screen time, essentially?
Right. Well, I don't like to give advice, but what I can do is I can share my experience and people can judge it accordingly. So what I found in my personal life to be advantageous in that sense is developing a discipline of how you spend your attention, really, because that's what seems to be the currency of this sort of economy. It's not information, it's attention. And so having some at least rough understanding of how much time you would like to spend on certain things, or what kind of signals you would like to pay attention to, and then also getting systems in place that allow you to like spend that attention when it makes sense rather than when it feels easy, really helps. So if you find something cool on Facebook, great, save it into your reading app and read it later rather than right now if you have something else to do. And so kind of practicing that handoff between different parts of yourself, like your future, your past self, your present self, allows you to kind of arbitrage your attentional reservoir. So that's something like very rough that I could say, and there are lots of resources that I can also point people to. If they want to, then they can just get in touch on the social media websites or via my website at wordspealing.com.
Perfect. Moritz, thank you so much.
My pleasure.